Right. Well, it's good to see all of you who are here, and I know others will hopefully be joining us, but we always like to get started on time because we are respectful of your time. We're really thankful that you're joining us today. I'm Drew Jameson, one of the members of the FDI committee. I'm in the Marriage and Family Therapy School. And again, just really happy to have you all here today. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our presenter for today. And you're in for a real treat. I can promise you that. So I will not delay any longer. And again, am very pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Brenda McAdd. She is actually one of our committee members as well. But just to tell you a little bit more about her, she is also our program director for the undergraduate criminal justice program. She came to ACU a year and a half ago, starting in January of 21. As a lawyer and former FBI special agent, Brenda has had the opportunity to walk through some of the most difficult days with victims and families affected by crime. Brenda spent over 20 years as a hostage negotiator, responding to crisis, suicide, and kidnapping for ransom cases. Brenda is also a certified mediator and leads the conflict resolution ministry at the Hills Church in the DFW Metroplex. In whatever spare time she happens to find, she says she enjoys scuba diving. In fact, is leaving tomorrow for a scuba diving venture. So I hope you have a great time away from all of your busyness tomorrow, Brenda. She also volunteers with her local police department and is trying to get 4 girls off to college, the way she puts it. So those are her hobbies right now. So we're very happy and excited for what you have to share with us today, Brenda. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being here to help us kind of walk through a conversation on how to have difficult conversations with people. And that's one of the things that that we get to do all the time for people, whether that is a SME or a student or a faculty member. There are numerous difficult conversations we can have with people. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how we do those hardest conversations well. How do we do that in mind with compassion and empathy? How do we do that in the political, conversations that we find ourselves that are sometimes very difficult? And one of the things about dealing with difficult people, or just people in difficult situations, are sometimes we don't know what to say. And so today, I just want to talk a little bit about where do you start with people? How do you have those hard conversations as a representative of your programs at ACU? And, maybe more importantly, how do we do that as representatives of the church and of Christ? So how do we figure out how to do that well? So one of the things that I'd like to and can you guys see the screen? It is not moving forward for me.
We're actually seeing your note view again, Brenda.
Okay.
But we do see your screen.
Awesome. We're going to try and fix that like we did before. All right, give me just a sec. Megan, how did we do that before?
I had suggested right clicking, but on the desktop screen, but I don't know if that was successful. When you tried it.
You were able to go to just your display settings, I think, that are on the screen right there, just above the slide.
Okay.
And then you went to slide view. Can't remember.
Of course, we tried this right before. Yeah, no.
Yeah, there's that little display settings drop down. You were able to go to that.
I don't see it now.
Okay.
And is that the one in the top, left corner?
Yeah,
Drew?
just above the slide.
Okay.
Love it when these have a mind of their own.
Right? There we go. Is that better?
Now share again.
How's that now?
Bingo. Got it.
All right. Okay. So how to have hard conversations with people. So one of the things that's most, okay, the slides are not going forward. There we go.
Bingo.
So here are the hard conversations that we have with people. You as a family member, as a parent, as a program director, with whether that's your faculty or whoever else, we are used to, with our friends and family, having conversations about money. Or somebody loses their job. We know how to have that conversation. We either, especially if you are a parent or if you are in a relationship and you are married, you know how to have conversations about moral conflicts and about sex and about illness and about change and about moving to a new place or a new job. But really, one of the things that's interesting about our culture and about our positions, probably with ACU over faculty and dealing with students, is that we're asking you to have conversations with total strangers about suicide and trauma and abuse and depression and death and COVID and a million other things, that we are not equipped to have those conversations with total strangers. But yet, when you ask somebody, how are you? And they don't say what you're expecting, which is fine, right? That you want them to just say, fine, how are you? Or these days it's like, oh, it's way too hot outside, I'm trying to stay cool, that type of thing, right? But when people say something to our how are you question, and they say, terrible, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer, I feel like giving up, or why does it matter how I'm doing? So those responses request from us something else besides the platitudes of, yeah, stay cool, or stay out of the heat, or glad you're doing fine, good to see you. Lots of times what we do in kind of that first response is, well, I'm so sorry that happened to you, I'll pray for you. But frankly, if we're honest, how often do we follow up with prayer? How often do we cover those people with prayer? And do we do anything else to speak into or to step into their situation? Because God gives us opportunities all the time to talk to people in difficult conversations and to talk to difficult people. Most people in our society will not take the time to deal with difficult people. But if they're placed in your path, or if you have to, because they're a SME and they can't use the book that they want, and they're very frustrated with you or with the instructional designer, or there's some student who tells you that the reason they can't turn in their reports are they're going through a domestic violence situation at home. And you have to respond in some way besides, I'm so sorry, I'll pray for you. Not that that's a bad response, but that there are other deeper responses that we can do and be there for people, because we have a choice. So it's all about choice. And we have an opportunity to make a difference for people in a difficult time. So mental health is on the rise. Violence is on the rise. We're seeing many more active shooter incidents like Uvalde and in Chicago for 4th of July, terrorism, just suicide in general. And really right now we have such a hurting world that needs us to speak life to it. And those students in your classes, the ones that are at risk, but also just the other ones who have everyday life stuff going on, you have a choice whether to take that opportunity and to speak into their lives or not. And lots of times for us, I think one of the problems that keep us from doing that is our own conflict style. You want to know about more conflict style, you need to talk to Kippy. But our own conflict style, whether we engage in conflict with people, we're okay with that. If we like to be involved with people's mess, or if we avoid conflict altogether. And if you're the type of person who your personality leads you to avoid conflict. So my mom is like that. She is an Enneagram 9. She just wants everybody to be happy. And if there's any, like we're at a family gathering, one of the children, I don't know, talks back or argues, or I have 5 kids. So that happens quite often with 4 teenagers and a preteen. But if anything, there's any kind of tension, my mom will just leave the room, because she doesn't like to be a part of that conflict. And so if you are in that situation, if that's you, you have to figure out how to speak into difficult situations and people's difficult lives with your own personality and how you deal with it. If you're more comfortable with being involved in conflict or people or difficult situations, then that will be an easier choice. But it still is a choice for all of us as we do that. And one of the things that's interesting about people is we're wired for connection. And so if you want to, you will learn from each other as much as you will learn from the presentation. If you want to put into the chat some different things about your top difficult situations that have risen with students. One, just so that each of you will know you're not alone in dealing with difficult things with students, because sometimes that's comforting in and of itself. But then also it may be help our conversation as we talk about then what are those most difficult issues we deal with the students, and then how do we find best practices for doing that? So if you want to kind of put in the chat just top issues, that would be great. But choosing connection, because we're wired for it, it's why when people get together at the faculty retreat, or if you see each other, you get together in town, you talk about, well, what have you been involved in? What are you doing? Because we're trying to make another connection. If you work with people every day in an office, then every Monday people gather and talk about their weekend, because we're reconnecting again based on experiences or interesting things we have to talk about. This picture is of two people I saw when I was up in New York at Central Park, and they came from different directions, were facing different directions when they sat down on these benches. The woman had a little boy that was with her that was kind of playing out in the area, and he did something funny, and the older man laughed. And within just a moment, they had turned and started talking. And then we're engrossed in a conversation because we're wired for connection with other people. And so we can use that to our advantage when we're dealing with difficult people or dealing with a difficult situation, just knowing that we truly are wired to make connections, and there's ways to do that easily. Here's some strategies for figuring out how to show love to people in difficult situations. I think part of it is internal. It's the first three. Remember, we're all sinners, and we have to resist temptation to judge, and we can't run away. Like, we need to engage with people. So then the next three are external. We try and figure out and reach out to those who need us, and to actually be intentional about doing that. And the next thing is to figure out their need and to meet it. It doesn't mean in every situation you have to become a counselor, or you have to become, a hostage negotiator. You have to become whatever, that person needs. But if you can figure out what the need is and figure out how to get them resources or to meet it yourself. And then the last one is just to speak life to people who are in bondage to whatever their difficulty is. And as we think about, if we're equipped to do that, we really need to understand whether we're a listener or a fixer. So I want you to watch this video.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on.
Ow.
If you would just.
Don't.
So are we fixers? Do we always want to fix a problem? Do we want to tell people what to do? Do we want to do that without listening and showing empathy? And that's just a funny way to kind of see the difference between how you can listen to people truly and just be there for them, but also those of us who are wired to fix problems, what that looks like. So one of the things about being a fixer or a listener in a relationship is that sometimes when I come home and I want to vent to my husband about whatever is going on, something at work or something with the kids, or he comes home and he wants to vent, one of our rules is we have to ask, do you want me to help you fix it, or do you want me to just listen? Because sometimes we need different things. And lots of times people just need you to listen to them vent, and especially before you give advice. So there's an old saying that advice given in the middle of a conversation is taken as criticism. Criticism of how they handled the situation, or criticism about how they're feeling. And so it's really important that we figure out first how to listen to people well. And so I'm going to go through a little bit what some active listening skills are and how you can do that. But this little list, and I wish I could come up with a nice little saying to help you remember these things, but this is how to start with people. I don't know what, that's like peak lurf. There's no good word for that. But it's just your presence. It's knowing that the other person is not alone. If you show up and you are willing to engage with people, whether that is a student on Zoom, whether that is a faculty member, or that is just somebody else difficult in your life or at church, if you will show up and be present. The next thing is showing empathy to people. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that if you're not innately empathetic. You can learn how to both develop it and convey it for people. So that's kind of, it sounds overwhelming, or you say things like the guy did in the video, that sounds hard, right? Like just showing some empathy for someone. And then asking questions, open-ended questions that allow someone to tell you their story, because everyone needs to talk, especially when they're going through a difficult time. And then to truly listen. Not for your next response, not for what you need to fix for them, but truly just listening to them. And then offering them resources, right? What can I do? Can I call someone? Can I get you some resources? That type of thing. And then following up with people. And if you'll follow this, kind of structure when you're dealing with people in difficult situations, it will make it easier if you kind of don't know what to do in a situation. So briefly, what active listening skills are, these are things that are taught to both mediators through dispute resolution programs, but also to hostage negotiators that are dealing with people in difficult situations, and like people who work on suicide hotlines. I did that for about 6 years, use these active listening skills with people in very, very dark places. You'll see, counselors use this, anybody who's dealing with people who need to tell a story. So all of these are intended to keep people talking, and they really work. So I'm going to give them to you in like 3 minutes, but if you will try and practice these just in conversation with your spouse, with your kids, with family, you'll see a lot more deeper conversation than when they get home from school. Like, how did school go? It was fine. What was your favorite part? Recess. Like, I got that a lot from my son over the years. But by using some of these active listening skills, I can get a lot more drawn out of him, even though he's 12. And so these are things that a lot of you innately do. Minimal encouragers, that's when you're talking to your older aunt on the phone, and she's telling you about her latest doctor's visit. So she starts telling you about the doctor's visit and all the things wrong with her. And you're like, wow, okay. Right. Just any sort of sound that encourages them to continue the story is a minimal encourager. If you're face to face with somebody, then those are nods or direct eye contact or a smile or anything that would be encouraging, just a minimal encourager to keep the story going. Open-ended questions are phenomenal. Not where were you? What color was it? Did you? Not closed-ended questions that it can be answered with one word, but true open-ended questions like what happened next? or where did you go, or what did you do? Like anything that's truly open that allows them to tell the story in the order and the way that they want to, because that's where you would get the most and deepest conversations with people. Reflection or mirroring is just saying the last few words of something they've said to encourage the next sentence, especially if somebody's struggling with telling you something. So they tell you about an incident that happened. And so I'll use traffic. I hate traffic. I don't like it when it's slow. I want to keep moving. And so I'm very upset, and I'm telling you about getting stuck in traffic. And I say, the traffic was terrible and I wasn't moving at all. And you say back to me, not moving at all. I'm like, no. And that is the worst part about it, right? So that mirroring or reflecting just a few last words that I said, then keep me conversationally going and moving it. Emotionally labeling is the most powerful thing that you can do for people. And it really moves you to that next level, not just listening, but having empathy for people. And so they tell you something really hard about a family situation, and you say, man, it sounds like you were really angry during that time. And they're like, yeah, I was. And not only have you listened to their story, but you've listened to the emotions that they have surrounding it. And that's very powerful if you can identify those for people. Don't be afraid to get it wrong. We get it wrong all the time. We'll say a word, then they're like, no, I wasn't angry, I was pissed. Or I wasn't angry, I was disappointed. I'm like, oh, well, disappointment can be very, hard to deal with inside, right? So you can say, I'm sorry, I didn't get it right, but thank you for, for telling me. And then you go on with whatever emotion they do tell you that they're feeling. So it's a good way to kind of help people put together those emotions along with the story they're telling you, and it helps people. So paraphrase or summary is just after they've talked for a long time about something hard, then you're going to say it back to them in your own words. Or a summary is you're going to be like, let me see if I got this right. And you're going to tell them their story back with the emotion. And so those things tell people what? That we're listening and that we've heard them, that we understand, that we get them. And effective pause can be used before or after something really important that they've said or that you're trying to convey to them. All right, so I want you to watch them in action just to get an idea about what that looks like. This is one of my favorite shows. It's The Big Bang Theory.
First, there was PlayStation, aka PS1. Then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4. And that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2. But no. Next came Xbox 360. And now, after 360, comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put into naming it.
Can you get the butter, please?
However, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard.
Get the other one. Pass the butter.
Hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously.
Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention.
Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking.
No way!
It's true, but the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating.
You wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat?
No, see, you absolutely would not. And then furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included.
Included?
Yes. Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory.
Why would they still be using DDR3? Are they nuts?
See, that's what I thought. But then they go and throw in an ES RAM buffer.
Oh, wait a second. Who's they?
Xbox.
You're kidding!
No, I am not. And this ES RAM buffer should totally bridge the 100 gigabit per second bandwidth gap between the two RAM types.
This is a nightmare. How will you ever make a decision?
See, I don't know. What should I do?
Please pass the butter!
Okay, so maybe a little Hollywoodized use, but she uses all of those active listening skills, right? She uses the reflecting and it's a nightmare for the emotionally label and all of the different ways, summarizing and asking questions. But did she use empathy? No, probably not so much because she wasn't really interested in the PS4 issue. But you can see like those, they do work to help keep people talking, and it's why we use them. So please use them with a little bit more empathy, but they really do work, and it helps keep people talking. And if we will show empathy for people on top of those active listening skills, it will make connections stronger between us, between whoever we're trying to deal with in a difficult situation. Let's say you've got an adjunct who is not doing very well in the classes. They're not participating in things. They don't respond to, or they don't get their grades in. I mean, whatever it is, you're going to have a difficult conversation with them. You can use these skills to make sure that the connection between you, and that you are using empathy, but still finding areas of common interest, keeping them talking, having a good conversation about whatever it is you're needing to have a conversation about. So if we've gotten to the point where, okay, we know how to listen to people and we understand the reasons why, then how do we build enough trust with people to be able to influence them, to be able to help them in a situation? And I would think this is especially true with us as faculty and program directors dealing with our students, because we don't get to sit with them in person. We don't get to hear all those things. We aren't involved in their lives. Yet we need to engage with them, especially the at-risk ones. And now that we're talking about the student experience, if we want to go toward, past just the having conversations with them on Zoom, to truly building trust with them in order to have an impact on their lives, which I think is the goal, right? That's the whole goal of the student experience and engaging with at-risk students. Then we have to figure out how to build trust with people. And that building trust is super important. So if you looked at some of the issues people put in the chat, and you want to now put in some best practices with connecting with students, as we're talking about how to build trust, that would be helpful to each other. Just trying to see if you've done something that's worked really well with someone in building some trust, in getting some more information about, from a student, and how we engage with people. One of the best ways to develop trust with people is to actually show empathy while you're listening to them. And not all of us are wired for innate empathy. So I wish we were all in the same room. I would have you raise your hands as to how many of you truly think that you have empathy. And I probably would see about 40%. It's kind of what I see. I teach a lot of police officers and a lot of church groups. Interestingly enough, a lot of people in ministry or missionaries do not have high empathy. And you're asking why, right? Why do people in ministry or mission field not have high empathy? It's because they can't function if they do. Because true empathy is both a gift. It is a gift to the world, but it is also a curse, because it is very hard not to get caught up in other people's mess, in other people's lives, and other people's trauma. And so my parents spent 29 years in the mission field in Kenya, rescuing kids off the street in Kenya, and had a school and a ministry and a church there. And I had lots of conversations with them about interns that would go over. And one of the things that they said is the interns that went over that were so empathetic, were wonderful with people, but it took a toll on them, and they burned out really quick. Because being in the midst of other people's trauma, being in the midst of dealing with very, very hard things, and I would say our law enforcement is also in this position, dispatchers, police, FBI, whoever deals with victims and violence, are in these same positions, that it is very difficult if you have true empathy to deal with everybody's worst day, because that's what we get to see. I spent 24 years seeing everybody's absolute worst day, and that can take a toll. And so I don't consider myself to be someone who has true empathy, but I've learned how to develop it and learned how to convey it over time. And you can too if you don't have true empathy. Those of you that do, it's wonderful. You're good at this. You already do it with everyone. That's why everyone wants to be your friend. But here's the 3 things that I learned work best for people when they're trying to develop empathy in a situation. So you need to imagine yourself in that person's situation, not in their life, not in their past decisions, not in all those other things. But as you do that, you have to set aside your beliefs and your agenda and be open to have your perspective changed. And what I mean by this is when somebody tells us something, a hard situation they're in, whether it's they've lost a job, they are having trouble in their marriage, whatever it is, we know they've made some bad decisions. And if we're honest, what comes up into our heads is, well, if they hadn't made those bad decisions, they wouldn't be in this position. That may be true, but it is very judgmental, and it puts us in a place that blocks empathy with other people. And so we have to figure out a way to set aside those judgments, to really imagine ourselves in that person's situation. But then we've got to figure out how we develop the actual feeling of empathy if we don't innately have it. And so here's what I do. I focus on the feeling that I have had in the past on a hard situation that I've been through. All of us have been through something hard, whether that is the death of a loved one, whether that is losing a job, whether that is having a child go through difficulty or trauma, whatever it is, we have had a hard situation and we've had those feelings that go with it. And so for me, I try and choose one that won't overwhelm me. And so I choose most time to pull up the feeling when my husband lost his dad, because he got cancer, he went into the hospital, 10 days later, he came out and went on hospice and we lost him. It was very fast. It was very hard. We felt very helpless and hopeless in that situation because it was just so fast. And so I remember how I felt. If it was my dad, I probably wouldn't use this memory because that would be a little bit too close and would swamp me. But I use one that's a little bit more removed, but very vivid for me. And so I pull up that feeling, how I felt. And then I hold that feeling while I'm imagining myself in the other's position, right? That other situation. And for me, that allows me just to have a little softening, right? So that I can feel and act and convey empathy to them in that moment. And that for me really does it. There's a video on YouTube by the Cleveland Clinic called, you can look up just probably empathy Cleveland Clinic and it'll pop up on YouTube, but I think it's called If We Could See in Each Other's Hearts. Go watch it. It's 4 minutes. It will develop empathy in you. You will feel empathy after watching that video. I usually show it, but it's way too long for this. But that feeling, then you'll know what that feeling is and it'll help you as you develop it for other people in those moments. And this is important. To be able to do this if you're not innately empathetic, is to figure out how to develop it, but also how to convey it. So those of you that know me personally, this is my speaking voice. I talk to my friends like this. I present. My voice is not terribly soothing. And so I know that. So for me, one of the things I do is I do what I call slow and low. And I did this for years as a hostage negotiator. I would go a little bit slower and a little bit lower with whatever I was saying. And it just sounds a little bit more compassionate, even if I'm not feeling it, right? But I know that about myself. And so I soften my tone when I talk to people. And I can do that slow and low for about 8 hours. That's been my max doing it. But it's one of the things that enables me to convey empathy in that moment. And it also helps me to slow down. And slowing down is sometimes what people in difficult situations really need from us. But also to convey empathy is you need to just acknowledge their emotion. Sounds like you feel betrayed. Sounds like you're really disappointed or that you're angry in this situation. And then to really ask further questions and show people attention. That conveys empathy and understanding in that moment.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So it's my favorite Brene Brown video on empathy, but she's got a ton of other stuff on empathy and on shame that's very good. But one of the things that once we've given empathy to people and we've listened to them, we really have to go a little bit further, right? It's great to tell them, thank you for telling me, I don't know what else to say, or to say something empathetic to them, and you've listened to them, but where do we go next? Sometimes that's one of the hardest things to do. So we've built some trust with people, and then we have to figure out how to speak hope to them. Because, you know, one of the most kind of important things about being able to walk into someone's hard situation or difficult situation, and then to be able to listen to them, to give some empathy, but also to speak some hope. We have to be careful not to block things then. We have to not say things like, it'll be okay. That happened to me, and then tell my own story. Or just the, I'll pray for you, or the at least. One of the other things that's, I think sometimes we want to do is distract people. So then we're like, shiny thing. And we want people to be distracted by the good things that are going on, or be distracted by some fun thing to do. But it doesn't really help their situation when they're it may distract them for a moment, and it may even make them laugh, but it doesn't in the long term give people hope. But what does help for people is to say things like, God gives second chances, and you're not alone. And to show them that by both your presence and your attention and your time, but maybe just to say a prayer together. And I love what Brene Brown says in there as a response, because sometimes we don't know what to say. It's just, I don't know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me. And I have used that several times. I had a friend recently who called me and said, I need some help. My mother's dying, and she's in Canada, then I had an empathetic response. We talked about that. And she said, and yesterday my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And, that wasn't the only things going on in her life, but that was two really big, hard things. And what do you say? I mean, sometimes when someone has had such a big loss in their life, or they have several things that are all stacked on top of each other for people, we don't know what to say. But being able to be there and to listen and to show people that we're willing to try and understand their feelings, those are all the things that build the connection. And that, combined with empathy, really does help make things better for people, even if you can't understand or if you can't fix it for them. which is not always our job, but to enable us to help people the best we can. So hopefully those things will help you as you start speaking hope to people, as you start speaking into people's hard situations. You know, if you have any questions, I just wanted to open it up, or if you have some situation where you know, were able to help a student, I would love for you to, you know, unmute your mic and tell the group, or put it in the chat so that we can just see if there's any questions about what things to do or ideas about how to help students better around this.
Brenda, I'll just mention that earlier Priscilla had posted just, I guess, giving an example of the kind of conflict that we can run into. She posted she had a student who took advantage of her kindness by asking for her to just pass her for the course. And when she declined and gave relevant reasons, she turned my words around and took it to the provost, which caused further review of my syllabus. So real good example of the kind of things that we might run into. I think about a time where I had worked with a student on an AIV, and it was verified by our faculty, you know, my fellow faculty. And I found out actually about a year later, she had felt very traumatized by it and was avoiding classes with me. And thankfully we had an opportunity to sit down and talk, because I think she was going to have to take a class with me. And so we arranged a conversation and were able to sit down and talk. But certainly I empathize with you, Priscilla, in those kind of situations.
Yeah, especially if it's in a position where we're also being attacked or we're being called into question, right? And so many times, one of the things we have to fight is that being defensive and really trying to understand the other person's perspective and situation without taking things personally. And I think that's very difficult for all of us.
And I think one thing that I have a hard time with is it's so hard to get students on the phone or via Zoom. So it's so much expressing empathy via your writing, and how to kind of build that trust via an email. And that can be really hard.
Yeah. One of the things that's super interesting about hostage negotiations in the last 10 years, as you can imagine, with technology growing, more and more of our negotiations were done through texting or done through a blog or Facebook, or however the millennials and Gen Zers that we were dealing with wanted to communicate with us, because they were not willing to get on the phone with us. So it was super interesting. We had to come up with ways in the written word that you can show empathy and show understanding. And so we started using some of the active listening skills, actually practice doing it through text and through email and through, you know, what DMing, right? I mean, however they would talk to us and when they were in the midst of crisis. And we found that like those one word, kind of like the mirroring we were talking about, the reflecting that we do, even just using that with the texting to continue the conversation and asking lots of questions. Lots of time I could not text fast enough to keep up with like a 19 or 20-year-old. And I'd have to say, by the way, I'm over 50. So that's why I'm not texting fast. But it's really interesting. Like, can we use emojis? What are the parameters in this kind of new world where much of our communication is on Snap or Instagram or just by email with students? And that it can be very difficult because you end up, I think, trying to be concise and we forget to be empathetic. And I want to be clear with my students because I don't want to end up, right, like Priscilla said about, then they twisted my words and took it. So you're like trying to be careful because you know that this might show up somewhere, and given to somebody else and then taken wrong. And so it's very difficult to figure out how do we best have those communication points. And, I think that practicing on our loved ones, right? And so I try, and when my kids are going through something hard, sometimes I'll text them about it, even though I would rather talk on the phone, because I know sometimes they need to process differently than I do. And so if I'm calling them on bad behavior or I'm asking them some hard questions, doing it by text or email, sometimes I find especially with my they're Gen Z, but they're all college age, that then it gives them time to process it, even if I'm asking or saying something that's hard for them to hear. And my generation didn't need that much more about the face-to-face and right then taking care of something. And so I think that that's something we have to keep in mind, especially dealing with our students, is that we may need to put something out there and then give them time to come back and have a conversation with us about an academic, violation, or about a missed, something they did wrong, or a comment they made to another student, is to give them some time before we confront them, to kind of process it. And I don't know if that helps, but I have found that with my own kids, like they need that more. And I don't know, what, I'm sure there's somebody's done some dissertation somewhere on that, but it's kind of an interesting thing that we see, especially with millennial and Gen Zers.
Brenda, kind of along that line, we've got students in our classes that are Gen Zers. We also have boomers and sometimes
Right.
older than that. So it's not like we can take one typical generation type thought and apply it to all the students in our classroom, because that's just not the case for us.
Yeah, and that makes it hard for when you're having the big Zoom meeting, right? And discussing certain things or talking about stuff. I mean, even I made some comment, I had a Zoom meeting and I had several kids, same thing. I had some that were, in their 40s, and I had several that were in their 20s. And I made some comment to MacGyver, and of course the 40 something laughed. And I, was like, well, I don't even remember what I said. But then I realized, I'm like, all the Gen Zers are like, who's MacGyver? And I was like, didn't they do a reboot of that? You should have seen it. Of course, the old one was better. But I think even our comments that we make and how we describe things is very different generationally. And because we have students that are at every point in life, they're retired and older than us, and then I've also got, some that are in their 20s, it is difficult to have those larger conversations. But maybe if you can get to Megan's point, if you can get them on the phone or you can get them on a Zoom, and we're one-on-one, then it's easier for us to kind of adjust our way of speaking and having that conversation, so that we can better communicate with them.
Brenda, one of the things I've had difficulty with is a couple of students in particular where it's chronic. It is something every week. And they all sound very serious. And, I don't know, is this legitimate? And I've tried to be empathetic, and then it just gets to be like, I don't know what else to do. I try recommending them to student services or to get some help. I find I'm at a loss. And I also find, quite honestly, the longer it goes on, the less trusting I am. Is all of this really happening? And if it is, you probably don't need to be in school right now, quite honestly. I mean, if all these huge life events are going on, you've got other things to worry about. But it's just been difficult for me to know on a couple of these, what do I do? I've tried to be empathetic, but it is every single week there is a major crisis.
Yeah. And it's probably stuff that you can't check out, right? That you can't, it's not like, well, send me your COVID test, or, you can hear them that they're really sick or whatever, but it's just other life things going on. That's a difficult one. I mean, and sometimes I think we have to be willing to have that difficult conversation and say, is there, are there too many things going on that you maybe should take a break from school? But again, maybe working with the advisors to have that hard conversation with them, because they may know a little bit more about their lives than we do, because they've dealt with them, on a little bit longer on other classes. But it's hard when you don't know if you're being told the truth. I spent a lot of years being lied to. I know that's shocking. But you kind of get after a while to a point where you're like, can kind of hear what are real excuses and what is truth. But that is such a hard thing to navigate, I think, with students, because we just want to believe them, right? And we want to help them. And we do want them to pass our classes. And we want them to go on in the program and finish up. And so that's I think a hard thing to navigate when we don't know for sure. But I think you're doing all the things that we can be doing for people is listening and then trying to help them, but also holding them accountable.
I was going to share that, I feel like when you asked earlier who are empathetic in the group, I feel like I definitely would have raised my hand and owned that, because I feel like as a nurse, I'm teaching the nursing School of Nursing at ACU, and am the track manager for the RN to B.S at Dallas. And nurses are inherently empathetic, and we've seen pretty much everything, and we've walked with our patients. And I was taught that from a baby nurse. I've been a nurse for 22 years. One of the first weeks I had as a brand new nurse on my own, almost killed a patient. Thank the Lord I didn't, but my nurse manager reached out to me as soon as the episode happened, and the doctor had the conversation with me, and the first thing she asked was, is the patient okay? And it wasn't about me. It wasn't about, she's probably thinking all of these legal things that she's going to have to ensue immediately. But I felt that was the most empathetic response at the moment, because she took the attention off of me and my mistakes and my problem, and redirected me to what our center goal was, and that was the patient care. And I think in this case, we can, so identify with Sandy and as she was speaking, but with Kathy's dilemma, I have found that when I have a recurrent student, I've had those as well, that have something every week, and they take advantage of, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of my kindness, because I always say, I really am sorry. And if they're in my office, oftentimes I'll say, well, can we pray about it right now? Would that be appropriate and comfortable for you? And so we can kind of set the tone of giving it to God and not holding on to it ourselves. But if it's recurring and it's in email or, whatever communication it is, our department's pretty small, and I'm not sure about anybody else's department, but I always say, I'm really concerned that, you're having lots of issues. And my main goal is for you to be successful in this class. And I want you to become the best nurse you can be. So if, you don't mind, I'm going to consult with my department chair, and I'm going to see if she has any solutions that we can all three work together to help you become successful. And oftentimes they don't want to go that far, and they don't want to really, involve a higher, the next chain of command. So they'll say, oh, that's okay, Dr. White, I'll just figure it out. And they miraculously get their assignment turned in, and it's, there's no penalty, or I'm not having to threaten them, or, and so I don't know if that's a possibility for anybody else, but that's been extremely helpful. And I do have a very supportive chair that, she kind of does hard things all the time. And so she's used to it. And so when I feel the pressure, I can always ask her to come and join my situation.
Yeah, that's a good point, is like bringing somebody else into it, where you are seeing whether or not they would tell somebody else those same things. And if they truly need help and if they want it, then they usually will. But if it's excuses, then maybe they would just go ahead and get stuff in. No, I like that.
Sure hate to interrupt a great discussion. I just, Kippy, if you would go ahead, we do have a survey for all of you who are present. So please, before you go, if you would just let us know how this went for you today. And we'd just like to get that feedback for Brenda and the rest of us here. Also, just want to point out, a couple of you have had good experiences with the Title IX office. As KK says, Sharita is amazing, and Catherine backed that up. So if we run into that, thankful to hear that's a good experience. Yeah, anything else, Brenda?
No, thank
Okay.
you guys for having me.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Brenda. And just to put in that we do have our event next month. I don't know the date off the top of my head. It's the second Thursday in August, but our own Kathy Carroll will be presenting. I want to be fit, but so she'll give us a great perspective on health and wellness. And we'll be looking forward to that, Kathy. Thank you, everybody, for being here.